Hello, everyone. Welcome to 10-Minute University Noontime Chat. Today's presentation is number 17 of our 2021 webinar series. Each of the previous presentation was recorded and posted to the cmastergardeners.org website that's shown on the screen under the 10-Minute University tab. For those who are not familiar with this trademark, it is owned by the Oregon State University, and the programs are developed and managed by Clackamas County Master Gardeners. It includes short classes, handouts, and videos, and our purpose is your gardening success. So we're very happy to have you here with us today. Today, we're going to talk about attracting and hosting pollinators. And that is because it is essential for gardeners to know about pollinators and work in benefit of pollinators, since they play such an important role in our natural world. Although wind and rain can pollinate some plants, more than 70% of flowering plants and 1/3 of the food plants require pollination by animals. And that's because their pollens are simply too heavy to be carried by wind or rain. And many of our favorite fruit and nuts actually require a pollinator to achieve the fruiting, such as blueberries, almond, apples, watermelon. So a world without pollinators would be very different in how it looks. When we use the term pollinators, often people think bees, and rightly so, because bees' bodies are built to move pollen particularly well. They have generally a pretty hairy body. And in addition, their hind leg is especially modified to collect and transport pollen. However, in our gardens, there are many other players, including butterfly and moth, wasps, fly, spiders, beetles, and other bugs that also play a role as they visit flowers in pollinating plants. So unfortunately, despite of their importance, the general conditions faced by pollinators is not good news. Combination of habitat loss and disease and pest and pesticides have contributed together to cause severe population decline in honeybees, native bees, monarch butterflies, hummingbirds. In the Pacific Northwest, there are 3 species of butterflies that are listed as threatened or endangered. And I'm not sure if you've heard of their names: Fender's Blue, Taylor's Checker Spot, and Oregon Silver Spot. So it's out there, and the problem is also close to home. So today, I would like to help you become familiar with 3 pollinators in our region, be able to match plants with their needs, understand their habitat requirements, and know 3 gardening practices or more that are beneficial to them. And the three pollinators I've chosen, actually, or three groups, are hummingbirds, native bees, and butterflies. Let's begin with hummingbirds. There are 7 species of hummingbirds that visit Oregon. And despite their very small stature, only 3 to 4 inches long and weighing a fraction of an ounce, they are capable of extreme acrobatics in the air. Part of the reason is because they're territorial. So as part of territorial display or courtship, you can see a hummingbird fly at up to 60 miles per hour. Isn't that absolutely amazing? Now, it's thrilling enough to see a hummingbird in the garden feeding on flowers or displaying courtship behavior, but it's even more exciting if they choose one of the trees or shrubs in our yard to make a nest. These nests are tiny. They're 1.5 inch outside diameter, and they're made with sticks and leaves, moss, lichen, materials they can find in the garden. And they're lined with very soft materials, downy parts of plants, like from dandelions and cattails, spider webs, the silk from spider webs. And if you have a nest, then you can expect to see 2 eggs in one clutch. The eggs will hatch in about 10 to 14 days. And then the chicks will fledge in about 3 weeks. So you can expect to see quite a bit of activities. The 2 kinds of hummingbirds that are most common in the Portland metropolitan area are rufous and annas. Rufous got its name from the reddish-brown upper and side feathers and the bright orange throat in the male. And you can see some of that reddish color in the edge and the base of the tail in the female. They are in our area during the summer for breeding. In fact, they would occupy most of Pacific Northwest all the way up to Alaska. And in late summer, they would move south and spend their winters in Mexico. Rufous, among all US hummingbirds, holds the honor of having the longest migration. From scientific research, it showed the longest one-way distance for rufous migration is 3,900 miles. And they do this every year. During the summer, go south, and during the and at the end of winter, come north. Anna's hummingbird has a small population that mate or breed in Southern Oregon into Northern California, and then overwinter in Mexico. However, in most of its range along the Pacific coast, it is residential year-round. And of course, Anna's, the male really stand out because of the rose red crown and chin, and the female, again, is less colorful. And we know through a citizen science research project called Project Feeder Watch, from data collected from 1987, and it's ongoing, so it's still happening. The 20-some years of data showed the winter range of Anna's hummingbird in 1989 was essentially California South. And in 2015, it had expanded to include Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. Isn't that exciting? So here is something that humans collectively have been able to do in benefit of a wildlife population. Now, hummingbirds like flowers in trumpet shape with abundant nectar and in bright colors of red, orange, pink. Here are some examples of what they really prefer. So let's look at each one. Hot lip salvia. The salvia flower shape is suited for hummingbirds, and hot lips has a very vigorous plant. Generally in one season, you can have a small plant, a 1 gallon plant grows to about 3 feet diameter, and it has a tremendous flower power. California fuchsia is in the genus of, used to be Epilobium. I don't know what's the current, no, Zauschneria. And anyway, it has a number of species and cultivated varieties. They can range from ground hugging, maybe 6 to 8 inches high, to shrubs of 3 foot diameter. And regardless of the size and shape, the flowers all are the perfect trumpet shape. California, oops, sorry. All right, Cape fuchsia are shrubs that range from 2 to 4 feet in size and have flowers of a variety of colors, including orange, hot pink, and yellow. Trumpet vine is something that you only want to grow if you can provide a good structure, because once established, it can become quite rampant and requires hard pruning to manage the size. However, it is the perfect hummingbird flower. So do grow it if you're able to support it properly. Penstemon is something that comes in a variety of flower colors and sizes, generally about 2 to 3 feet high and wide. And finally, native honeysuckle is a vine that is much more tidy than the trumpet vine. So if you're not able to try trumpet, perhaps the native honeysuckle would work for you. These are just a very small number of choices, and you might want to check out the OSU publication listed on this page to find more options. Research shows that hummingbirds prefer natural nectar when they're available, but they do use feeders to supplement their natural diet. So if you choose to feed hummingbirds, generally use a 1/4 cup of sugar for 1 cup of water. And use table sugar, not honey, because when honey is diluted, it is a perfect medium for growing fungus and bacteria. And when the weather is really cold, for example, to feed the overwintering Anna's hummingbirds, up the quantity of sugar to 1/3 cup per cup of water. And it's best to make them in small batches and leave out the red dye. Instead, get a feeder that has red color in order to attract the birds. And the best size is the size that holds quantities small enough for you to use it in a day or two. And make sure that it is easy to clean and have a bee guard to keep the bees out. I had mentioned earlier, hummingbirds are territorial. So keep in mind with placing plants and feeders in the garden, it's better to have a larger number of small feeders placed in different areas rather than having one large feeder with many ports. That way you serve more birds. And avoid direct sun so your solution will last longer. So put it all together, a good habitat for hummingbirds will have flowering plants supplemented with feeders, and keep in mind the territoriality of these birds. So place the plants and feeders accordingly to serve more of them. They don't need to drink water because they get it from the nectar, but they do use water for bathing. And if we have the right trees and shrubs, it affords them places to perch, rest, and to nest. And remember those downy nest materials. A lot of the materials in our garden could potentially be used for construction of their nest. And finally, hummingbirds eat insects and spiders for protein. They don't just drink sugar water. So it's really helpful to keep our gardens pesticide-free because we don't know the many ways pesticides can reach these little birds. All right, moving on to butterflies. Butterflies complete their life cycle through 4 stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And one cycle takes anywhere from 3 weeks to several months. So they're very short-lived. When we see an adult butterfly in our garden, chances are it's doing these things: feeding on plants with nectar, maybe getting water and minerals from wet soil. They may be looking for host plants to lay eggs. And they also may be searching for trees to roost overnight as shelter. What's also perhaps happening in our garden, but less visible to us, are activities that happen on a host plant. The eggs are laid on the leaf of the host plant. The caterpillars feed on the leaves of the host plant. And then the chrysalis, a pupa that's protected by the hard shell, may be attached to the host plant or perhaps fallen on the ground and laid in leaf litter. So most butterflies and moths can overwinter as larvae or pupae or adults. You might have seen the woolly bear caterpillar in the garden. This is the youngster of the Isabella tiger moth. And if you're wondering how butterflies are different from moths, butterflies tend to be active during the day while moths are active after dark. Butterflies have bodies smaller for the wing size, and moths are the opposite. Butterfly antennae at the tip have a club or a swelling form, and the moths don't have that. And finally, when butterflies perch, they tend to press their wings together, while moths have their wings spread open. So is this a moth or a butterfly? It's a moth because the wings are open flat. What about this? It's a butterfly because when you look at the antennae, it has the swelling at the tips. So I mentioned most butterflies can overwinter as larvae, pupae, or adults, but the monarchs cannot. And I think most of us know they undertake epic migrations. So in the United States, there are 2 distinct populations of monarchs. The eastern and western are separated by the Rocky Mountains. At the end of summer, the eastern monarchs would migrate south for overwintering in the mountains of Mexico, and the Western monarchs would migrate to the Pacific coast. And once they reached their wintering ground, they would huddle together in many layers, many deep, in trees, and also lower their body temperature in order to conserve energy. And in that state, they would remain for many, many months until the temperature warms up and the butterfly would become active and reverse course. And the eastern generation, we know, would go north and stop generally around Texas or Oklahoma. And that's where they would begin to lay eggs, start a new cycle, and the super generation of butterflies that made the migration to Mexico would die. And through the cycles of egg, caterpillar, pupa, and adult, they would continue in successive generations to eventually reach northern part of the US or southern Canada, where they would spend the summer. The Western population is less well known, but we do know the Western generation, Western populations are found in the inland areas of California, West and Southwest, and in the Pacific Northwest, they are found inland, so they are east of the Cascade Mountains. If you live in the valley of, let's say, Oregon, or the coastal areas, just know there is a very small fragment population of monarchs that appear in this area, but it is not common to see a monarch. If you want to help monarch butterflies, plant milkweed, because that is their host plant. And it's not just any kind of milkweed. It has to be the correct specific type. You can go to the xerces.org website and find the milkweed that's correct for your area. I've listed the species that's correct for Oregon or different parts of Oregon. And if you plant milkweed, you might consider joining a citizen science project called Monarch Milkweed Mapper. They do just as the name of their website suggests. And one thing you might not have heard of is there are people who collect monarch eggs and raise them in captivity and then sell the chrysalis for special celebrations, hatch and release. It may sound like a really fun activity. The problem with these operations is they've been known to spread pathogen from the raised butterflies into the wild population. So it's not a good thing. And let's not be part of that. Monarchs are probably best known in terms of their plight for survival. But I mentioned earlier in the Pacific Northwest, there are other butterflies in trouble, and Taylor's checker spot is one of them. It's endangered. It has only 2 isolated populations left because their habitats are mostly gone. And you might not, well, you might have read this story. The inmates at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Oregon are raising caterpillars for release into the wild. I just earlier said, don't buy monarch chrysalis, but this is part of a collaborative project with scientists, researchers, and conservation organizations involved. So they're doing it right, and disease is not an issue. And the Oregon silver spot is also in serious trouble, and the Oregon Zoo is raising caterpillars for release, and Nature Conservancy has a reserve in the coastal Oregon area where there is habitat for these butterflies. And in our gardens, we can still expect to see a good variety, possibly 20 or more. Spring azure is an example. They use a variety of host plants. Most of them are native shrubs, and they also feed from many nectar plants. When I garden at my community garden, which is right by the Tualatin River, I tend to see spring azure, probably because there are a lot of elderberry, big shrubby tree nearby. Painted lady is another butterfly that we're likely to see in our gardens. And this is an opportunity to remind all of us that butterflies in general really enjoy flowers with a wide landing pad shape, like these flowers in the picture. Zinnia, aster, cosmos, purple coneflower, all offer that wide landing pad and makes foraging much easier. And swallowtails are ones that I tend to see in my garden. And probably that's because there are big leaf maple and cottonwood nearby, which are good host trees. And in my garden, I tend to see them on clumps of phlox and verbena, two of the many nectar plants that they enjoy. So a good habitat for butterflies will offer them flowering plants. And I should emphasize that butterflies are nearsighted. So it's helpful to have their nectar plants be in a large bunch, so it's easier for them to see. And remember the flower shape that works as a landing pad. They also need host plants, and give them a sunny location for basking because they need to warm up their muscles before they can fly. That's why we generally don't see butterflies before the air warms up to about 60 or more. And I mentioned that adult butterflies, as they're going through our garden, may be scouting for a place to roost overnight. And so providing them shelter from wind and rain is helpful. And puddle, I'm going to say a little more next, as a source for water and minerals. And finally, try to keep the garden pesticide free, because again, so many things in the garden can affect them. So here's how you can make a butterfly puddle. The supply list is rather short: a big shallow saucer, some sand, composted manure, and water. And in this video demonstration, which I show the link on the bottom from University of Georgia, they use a saucer that's roughly 22-inch diameter, and it's rather shallow. You can see the picture here. And so basically you fill the saucer with sand, you add a couple tablespoons of composted manure, mix it in well, smooth the surface, and make a slight indent in the center. And then you add water until the water has saturated your mixed sand manure and it's pooling at the surface. Then you stop. That's it. Put it in a sunny location and wait for the butterflies to come. And it will be a good place for them to bask in the sun, and at the same time to lap up the minerals from this butterfly puddle. You want to keep it moist, add water as the water evaporates, and empty out the content and start again once a month. So now let's move on to native bees. There are roughly 4,000 species in North America and possibly 800 in Oregon. We just don't know that much about the bees in Oregon. And the Oregon Bee Atlas is rectifying that. It's an initiative led by Oregon State University, and it's part of the Oregon Bee Project that involves OSU and departments of agriculture and forestry. They have an excellent website, so if you're interested in bees, you might want to check it out. And they have a lot of good resources for homeowners, landscapers, different situations. So much of what we know about bees came from honeybees, but really honeybees are an anomaly in terms of how bees live and behave. Most bees, 90% or more, are solitary. They don't live together with other bees. And honeybees live in a hive, but really, except for bumblebee that nests together in a colony, all other bees just live by themselves. So the native bee lives this way. The life cycle begins with an adult who lives 4 to 6 weeks. The adult, the female, collects pollen and nectar, make a ball, and lay an egg on it. And the egg hatches in a few weeks. And the larva will feed on this ball of pollen and nectar. And when that's eaten up, it will pupate, and then it lays and wait until the conditions are right in the environment. Then it emerges and becomes the adult and repeat the cycle. Now, honeybees are social, but their colony only lasts one season. And this is how it works. It begins with a hibernating queen waking up in the spring, and she finds a good nesting location, makes a ball of pollen and nectar, and lays an egg on it. She repeats the process until more bees hatch, and they become her workers to build up the colony. And throughout the summer, the colony will continue to expand until the end of summer into fall. She will lay a final batch of eggs, and they will hatch into male and female. The old queen will die. The new queen will leave the nest and mate and find a place to overwinter. And next year, the life cycle begins again. So the bees we see in our gardens, the social bees tend to be around for much of the season, many, many months. But the native bees tend to be seasonal. Some will emerge earlier, late winter, early spring. Others will emerge later, just for the spring, just for the summer, or into fall. And the thinking is the time they emerge has been coordinated with what flower resources are available. So the thinking is they co-evolve with native plants and the bloom of native plants. So when you think about this, if we really care about helping native bees, we need to provide a very long season of plant resources, nectar and pollen, in order to benefit more of them. I used to be confused about how bees are different from flies, and I find these tips useful. Flies have their eyes in the front of the head, and they have very short antennae. And generally, they have no hair on the body. While bees have, well, often very hairy bodies, much longer antennae, and often they have pollen basket in their hind leg. So is this a bee or a fly? It's a bee because it has really long antennae. What about this one? It's a bee. See how the pollen are stuck to the body, to the abdomen, and on the hind leg? We know quite a bit about the kind of flowers bees prefer. This is based on research. And it comes down to 2 colors and 4 shapes in the flower. We'll look at each one of them. Bees can see ultraviolet light. So the flowers in blue and purple are particularly attractive to them. They also like flowers with a violet color marking on white. So you may be looking at these flowers and thinking they look blue, pink. Well, the violet markings are on white near the center of the flowers. There are also 4 shapes of flowers that the bees particularly like. One is called open platform. So think of something like a daisy or an aster, which makes the nectar and pollen in the center very easy to reach. The second shape is pollen bowl, something like a poppy. And these flowers tend to have no or little nectar, but very rich in pollen. Yet another shape are flowers that are buzz adapted. In these flowers, the pollen is locked in to the anther. Only when a bee flies nearby and buzzing with its wing beat will the anther release the pollen. So this minimizes the chance of the wrong creature come by and rob the pollen. And penstemon and Arctostaphylos or manzanita are examples. And finally, the easy access shape. Look at this flower. This is a verbascum. The flowers are arranged vertically to make it really energy efficient to get the pollen. So a good bee garden would be sunny for easy visual orientation, open, so it has good access, has large stands of flowers, so foraging is energy efficient, has a variety of flowers in order to serve a variety of bees, and has a long season of bloom. As we already know, the native bees emerge for short seasons, early spring to late fall. And the most recent research by Oregon State University Garden Ecology Lab shows that native plants are preferred by native bees. So I'm going to walk you through this chart here, this graph here. The study tested 27 kinds of plants. So the names of the plants are on the bottom. And the way they figure out whether a bee likes a plant is they sample for 5-minute intervals all the bees that are on that plant with the suction, with a vacuum. And of the 27 plants they tested, 4 are exotic species and the rest are native. So the 4 exotics have a red asterisk. So when you look at this list, you might think, what? The exotics are winning. This is oregano. The second one is lavender. Look at the total number of bees visiting them. They're clear winners. However, remember, honeybees are not native. They're introduced from Europe. And take a look at these bars. What are these bees visiting oregano and lavender? Mostly honeybees, because a honeybee is shown in that yellow color. And so when we look at the rest of the bees, green bees, bumblebees, green bees are in green, bumblebees are in the blue, and the rest of the native bees are in orange, you can see not a good fit. So let's take out the honeybees from the equation and look at the same plants. And what does that show? Well, totally different result. Now the exotics are toward the end of the pack, with the lavender being sort of in the middle. And let's look at the winners. Phacelia, I'm sorry, it does not have a common name, is the clear winner, attracting bumblebees, some green bees, and many other native bees. The second one has a nice common name, California poppy. The third one is Douglas aster. The next one is goldenrod. And number 5 is pearl everlasting. It also goes by pearly everlasting. And Aerophyllum is Oregon sunshine. That's the common name. And Sedosia is checker mallow. And lavender, you already recognize that name. So, oh, and Clarkia has no common name, it's just Clarkia. And the same thing for Gilead. So, oh, and the next one is Achillea, so there's yarrow. So as you can see, when we take honeybees out of the equation, it shows native bees have a strong affinity and definitely prefer native plants. And you can go to their website to get a lot more information of the results from previous years. I mentioned earlier, most bees are solitary, and of all the solitary bees, 70%, 70, nest underground out of our sites. And the rest, 30%, will nest above ground in crevices. So you're familiar with the mason bee. They find the tube of the right diameter and make a nesting net. But you may not be familiar with soil nesting bees. As shown in this picture, these little mounds of soil are what were excavated when the bee is making the underground nest. And this picture, if you're not looking at the bee, you might think, oh, that's an ugly looking lawn with some bare patches of soil and lots of weed. Well, it happens to be also a good bee habitat. So if you have a lawn that needs renovation, just leave it alone and put a sign that says pollinator habitat on it, and people will admire you for it. Well, so in your garden, if you can leave some bare ground and leave some dried out plant stems, pithy ones that are, or hollow twigs, brush pile and snacks, don't keep it too neat, because all of these are potential places and materials for native bees to nest. I find it very difficult to have bare grounds. I like to plant really full, and I'm learning to leave some bare areas with no mulch because they don't have the ability, the strength to dig through layers of mulch. All right, so a good habitat for bees will offer flowering plants for pollen and nectar. I've mentioned the 2 colors and 4 shapes. The flowers need to last a long season, have great variety. The more variety, the more types of bees that we're able to serve. And one thing I did not mention is larger clumps. The Xerces Society recommend a 3-foot diameter if we can do it, because again, it's energy efficient. Don't make them work harder than it needs to be. And I've mentioned native bees prefer native plants. So use some native and some non-native to achieve what you like. They also benefit from a sunny location because they have to warm up their muscles before flying. And remember the bare ground with no mulch for those bees that nest in the soil, and crevices for the bees that nest above ground. And finally, keep it pesticide free if you can. Now I challenge you to find 3 native bees in your garden this summer. Go out and look around. I have taken so many bee identification classes, and I practically fail every one of them. I just don't have a knack for figuring out these bees. So if I can figure out these 3, I know you can do it too. Bumblebee, I think everyone knows what they look like because they're big, visible, and noisy when they're flying. There are some bees that actually have a green metallic color to them, like the green sweat bee. I know that's one you can identify, again, because it's easy just by the color. And the third one I'm going to suggest is the longhorn bees. It doesn't have anything really special other than the long antennae, but you have to get really close to be able to see it. But I'll tell you where to find them. These longhorn bees are known to have, well, the males, the bachelors, they like to spend the night in flowers. So they actually just sleep out in flowers of the aster family. And good examples would be cosmos or sunflower or aster, anything with that kind of a flower shape. So if you have these flowers in your garden, just go out early morning and look into the flower. And if you see bees sleeping there, those are the bachelors of the longhorn bees. And guess what they're doing there? They're waiting for the girls to come by. So I've mentioned repeatedly, try to keep the garden pesticide free. And here is just a quick review of how does pesticide relate to bees and pollinators. So we know pesticide destroy, repel, or prevent a pest. And insecticides work against insects. So they can kill pests and they can kill beneficial insects and pollinators. Herbicide works against weeds and they can kill plants that are food for pollinators. Fungicide works against plant pathogens, and some of them weaken pollinators' ability to digest food, fend off disease, and detoxify insecticides. So there are many different pathways to affect pollinators through these chemicals, and most of them are not visible and necessarily direct contact. Oregon State University recommends integrated pest management. When there is a problem in the garden, we need to first identify what is the cause. And you might think, how am I going to figure this out? Well, you're not alone, because Master Gardener helplines exist all across Oregon and, in fact, the United States. So take a good picture to show the problem and write a good description, and we are happy to help. once you know what is the source of the problem, think about what is the level of damage that you're willing to tolerate. And, And then consider using low impact methods like removing the pest by hand or washing it away with a jet of water or pruning. And there may be alternatives, such as replacing diseased plants instead of having to treat and treat again year after year. And if you do choose to use pesticides, see if there are benign alternatives. And finally, whatever you use, make sure you read the label and follow the instructions. And if you use pesticides, here are 3 things that will help reduce pollinator exposure. Simply don't spray during bloom. Don't allow spray to drift onto blooming weeds. Drift is wind or air currents carrying what you spray into adjacent areas. And don't use soil drench or tree trunk injections because these would allow the chemical to get inside the plant and it will become present in the pollen and nectar. And I mentioned benign pesticides earlier, and here are just some examples: insecticidal soap, horticultural oil, and the BT. So let's begin. Let's make our garden a refuge for pollinators by providing food plants and host plants, offer them places to rest and make nests. We can add clean water, butterfly puddle, and hummingbird feeder. We can apply integrated pest management to minimize the presence of pesticide in our home gardens. We can join a citizen science project to learn more about them and spend more time in your garden looking at the pollinators, enjoy them, and share the joy. So these are the resources that I found very helpful, and I highly recommend them to you. And I will keep this on the screen for a minute or so in case you want to note anything down, and we'll open up for question and discussion. And I'm going to invite my co-host Leah to join me.
Thank you, Sherry. That was absolutely fascinating. I just wanted to add a couple of things. You mentioned the Oregon Bee Atlas. They're also starting up phase 2 of the Bumblebee Project. You can look at the Xerxes Society and get information on that. I've been involved in that for 2 years, and it's really, really a fun way to go out, be in nature, and learn a lot about bees. And they help you identify, because I have the same problem you do in which bee is this? So there's lots of good resources there. So I recommend that to anybody who is interested in doing a citizen science project. We actually only have one question, and it's I think a good one. It's does overhead watering harm pollinators?
That's interesting. I mentioned the Oregon State University Garden Ecology Lab in the presentation. They have done a number of research projects, one of which is studying gardens in the Portland metro area and identifying the presence of bees and other pollinators. And they did a 3-year field project, and research findings are just coming out. So you can learn more about what they have found out and the bees they found in Portland area gardens at their website. One of the things that they found is they thought, I think it was an interim conclusion, not a final conclusion yet, because they're still looking at the data, but they suspect overhead watering reduce the presence of bees in garden. And because the data has not been fully analyzed and the papers are not written yet, this is interim. There's not a really good explanation, except that is something that they have observed. So unfortunately, I don't have strong scientific research information to back up this, but all I can share is this is something that was found as a correlation in our local study of Portland area gardens.
Well, and that would make, I think, an interesting, so say you're trying to water your garden, and we know that water is becoming more and more scarce. So doing drip irrigation and just down low to the ground, we know conserves water and might also help the pollinators. So that'd be a great solution to work toward. I'm not there yet.
And I would say stay tuned. The exciting thing about not knowing a whole lot is that there is more work and more information is coming out.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're always checking out what's the latest research. For example, the Garden Ecology Lab right now is doing a research study on, you know, we talk about natives, but we also have cultivated varieties of native species in order for the flowers to become, you know, more attractive, a different color, etc. So the question is whether the native species or the cultivated variety of the native plant provide the same value in their pollen and nectar to the native bees. That's something that we don't know, but there is a project right now that's looking at this information, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, it'd be good to know. So we have, hang on, let me look. I think we might have a couple more questions. Would you repeat when to use, somebody's more interested in the sugar for the hummingbirds, when to use 1/3 cup and when to use 1/4 cup?
Yes. So think of it this way. The standard formula is a quart of water. When it's really cold, we want to give them something that has higher calorie. So we want to up the sugar to 1/3 cup for a cup of water.
Okay.
That's it. And I should mention that this actually came from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, because, you know, we've always known the 1/4, but I've never seen the 1/3. And when they explained it, it made sense. And the 1/4 to 1/3 range sugar solution actually came from studies of nectar, flower nectars, and natural nectar generally falls between 1/3 and 1/4 in the sugar content. Isn't that interesting?
It is. Okay, we have another question about the butterfly watering dish kind of thing.
Puddle, yeah, the puddle.
And the butterfly puddle, yes. Do you have to add composted manure? And what does it do?
Yeah, the manure actually provides the minerals.
Okay.
And I know I've seen many, many times in the wild where there will be some fresh poop.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll see so many butterflies huddled on this fresh poop. And I've always wondered, what are they doing there? Why did they just stay there and won't even leave? And that's because they're lapping up the water and the minerals. And they can also potentially get minerals just from a wet puddle, from soil. But in reality, in our gardens, minerals are generally not that available, especially when it's dry, you know, during the summer when the butterflies are active. So the composted manure is a way of providing the minerals these butterflies need. And I'm not certain the ratio of sand to manure, because the University of Georgia video demonstration says, 2 tablespoons for the sand that fills a shallow tray, roughly 20, 22-inch diameter. So I suspect this information is not based on research, but it's kind of based on something that is logical and people have tried out.
Mhm. Okay, I think that is, here's another one from Dennis. Is chlorinated water okay for the butterfly puddle, or should it be sit outside for a while?
I would recommend let it sit and let the chlorine gas be released before putting it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna have some good butterfly puddles coming in the next week or so. So thanks
I'm
for
very
that.
excited about it. I should mention that if you go watch that University of Georgia video,
Mhm.
it's really fun because the first half demonstrates how to make the butterfly puddle. And then the researcher went on to show how you can feed butterfly. And I've seen this in warmer places. I remember this is Georgia. So he took out a dish and he cut up a whole bunch of fruit and put it in this tray.
Mhm.
And he talked about using, very ripe bananas and, cut up all kinds of, melon, etc. And I started thinking about, and even in some of the photos that he showed, you can see all these fruit flies and all kinds of other things that I would not really want to attract huge numbers to my garden. So I decided that, let's just stop with the puddle and not get into the fruit bowl. But, that's certainly something that you can try if you have the tolerance for all kinds of visitors.
Okay. Here's a great question. What is the latest on neonicotinoids? Are they still a big problem and being used by the big box stores?
I don't know if the big box stores are using neonics. So for everyone, neonic is a class of pesticides that is systemic, which means that the plant absorbs into itself and then it stays within the plant and can transport and move around into various parts. So the problem with this kind of pesticide is it has long-term effect. Of course, the benefit and attractiveness for why this was developed and used in the first place and became so popular is because it lasts a long time. So it fixed the problem for pest or disease for a long time, but it stays around in the plant for a long time, and therefore it's there, continue to give the affected pollen and nectar to your bees and anything else that comes by and use the plant. I don't, I think when I go to a nursery, I would ask them if they had treated the plants that I want to purchase. And I asked them what was the treatment, because nurseries don't want people to bring plants back saying, oh, I bought this plant and then it has such and such problem. So in order to not have to run the risk, they are likely to have sprayed the plant or treated it with something which would allow it to last longer and perform better in your garden. But if you ask, generally, they are aware of the problem and they will tell you, and that's how I would deal with it.
Okay, that's a great answer. I remember a few years ago at some of the big box stores, it was like, this has been treated with neonics, so you're not going to have any pests. And isn't this a wonderful thing? And it's like, no, not really. Last question is there any antagonism between the various types of pollinators, bees against butterflies, for example?
Well, for quite a while, there was a concern about, especially with more people raising bees, home backyard bee colonies, and I'm talking about honeybees. There has been a concern about competition between the honeybees using up floral resources and not having so much left for the natives. Because when the natives cannot find enough native plants that they may prefer, they will go use other plant pollen and nectar that's available. And I'm not aware of any research that definitively says either yes, there is an issue or no, there is not. But I have heard discussions and observations from the scientific community that there is a concern. And there is a concern both in the competition, because honeybees tend to be more organized and aggressive than many of the smaller native bees, just in behavior. And the second thing is there's only so much floral resource available. Think about it. You know, if in my garden there are only so many flowers, so much pollen and nectar, who is going to get it? And if everybody, not everybody, if more and more people in the urban area are doing backyard beekeeping by keeping honeybees, but maybe they are not proportionally increasing the floral resources available by planting more flowering plants, how does that work out with a limited resource?
Yeah.
And so my understanding is now universities are really trying to train people before they go into keeping honeybees in their backyard, and making sure that there is a good assessment of the general environment before getting into raising bees. And obviously, we want to encourage more gardeners in their home gardens to grow more flowers, because we know if you grow pollen and nectar plants, bees and other pollinators will come and use it. It's not going to waste, in addition to, you know, obviously we enjoy looking at them.
Yeah.
So keep growing.
And on that note, I think that wraps it up. You've got, got some great questions and some really good answers for those. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and thank everybody for joining us today. Well, this is the last presentation for April. We're going to take a week off, and then we're coming back in May, and we will have one presentation every week for the entire month of May. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you back in May. We have lots of good topics in the works for you, and we want to help you be successful in your garden. So take care and see you soon.
Thank you, Sherry.
And thank you very much, Leah, for co-hosting.